Welcome to another edition of Illinois Lawmakers as the General Assembly in Springfield winds down to the scheduled May 31st adjournment date. Rich Miller is alongside from CapitolFacts.com. Rich, you broke the story this week that the House Democrats were going to run their own budget, and run it they did.
Yeah, boy, howdy. They had 63 votes. They only needed 60, and it's apparently $7 billion out of whack. And there are no plans to pass any sort of revenues to pay for it.
So why do this when there's no likelihood that it'll ever see the light of day? The governor's already said he's going to veto the thing if it gets through the other chamber.
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. I think, one, the Republicans say, and I kind of agree with them, that the Speaker Madigan was attempting to derail these non-budget negotiations on things like workers' comp by running this bill. But the meetings are still going to happen. The governor and the leaders are still going to meet. So I don't think he's completely successfully derailed that. The other thing, he wants to continue putting Republicans on the spot. So they vote no on his budget. And then he's hoping maybe when it comes time to override the veto, one or two of them will break free and vote with the Democrats and help him to override the veto.
Well, so far, he hasn't had much luck prying anybody loose from Jim Durkin here in the House.
Zero luck.
So this is basically a public service announcement to anyone who might be so inclined to go along with some of the turnaround agenda?
You know, the man is about sending messages, and that was a message. I'm not interested in the turnaround agenda. I'm interested in passing a budget, and that's it. And also as a side issue or a main issue, I'm interested in using this as a political issue in November.
So some of the Republicans who've been in on these working groups have said there actually is some progress being made behind the scenes.
Not just Republicans. Democrats are saying the same thing. Even House Democrats who are on the workers' comp negotiations are saying that there is some progress being made.
The question now is, what will the Senate do with this thing? There was some discussion back and forth between the two caucuses about the numbers that were eventually used in this thing, but what do we think President Cullerton will do?
Well, I think the president will speak with his members and see what they think. And if they think, no, we're not going to go along with this because it could potentially derail the non-budget negotiations, then they won't do it. They could just postpone it. They could add to it. You know, there's some pressure among the Senate Democratic caucus to spend even more money on education than what the House spent.
And at this point, there's a possibility the House could pass one budget, the Senate passes another one, and nothing happens?
Well, the House has already passed its budget, and there have been times in the past where the Speaker has sent a budget over and said the House has concluded its business and ignore the thing sent over by the Senate.
And that is not, as you say, that's not without out of the realm of possibilities.
It's happened many times.
So, you called it crazy talk in one of your columns here recently, but is it possible we may not have a budget till November?
Well, it's crazy talk to think that we should wait till November. It's not crazy talk to think that it won't happen until after November. But, when members go out there back to the districts, they're going to get bombarded with mailers, TV, and radio ads for the next several months from both sides. And win or lose, they're going to come back to this town, and they're not going to be in a good mood in November. I mean, the Speaker is still smarting about the primary race that he had, and that was March 15th, and this is the end of May. So if it's taken him over 2 months to get over it, which he hasn't, I don't think yet, then, imagine how long it's going to take rank and file, people who aren't so used to this sort of thing.
Rich Miller, thanks very much. We appreciate your time and your insights.
We could never get a budget.
Still to come, we'll dig further into the budget that was passed here in the Illinois House of Representatives this week. Joining me now on Illinois Lawmakers, two veterans of the Springfield legislative scene, House Deputy Majority Leader Lou Lang, Democrat of Skokie, and Assistant Senate Republican Leader Dave Syverson of Rockford. So yesterday in the Illinois House of Representatives, the House, along party lines, passes a $39 billion budget, 63 to 53, based on $32 billion in revenues. What was the point of that?
The point was to establish first our priorities, the values of the people of the state of Illinois, and also to say that these are some of the things we ought to be looking at. We have a governor who hasn't been interested in actually doing the budget. He's put what he calls the turnaround agenda, non-budgetary items, ahead of doing the budget. He will not discuss the budget itself, and so we had to establish our priorities so that we could hopefully jumpstart a conversation about those priorities.
Senator, your party sees it somewhat differently, I assume?
Well, the non-budgetary items are really the core of what's turning things around. Why are we having the largest amount of migration out of Illinois than any other state? It isn't because our taxes are too low or our jobs climate is too good. And so I think what the governor says, and most of us agree too, we have to change the fundamentals that for the last 12 years have been putting us further and further in the hole. So improve the jobs climate, then let's come up with a compromised budget, which is going to include new revenues, because that's the only way, until we grow the economy, that's the only way we're going to close the gap. But it really needs to be both.
Democrats agree that we need to improve the jobs climate. That's why it surprises us that the governor hasn't done the budget, because without the budget, people are losing their jobs every day. People that run social service agencies, people that provide services, people at our state universities. We're happy to sit down and talk to the governor about issues that will improve our economy, bring businesses to Illinois. But none of that should come before the work of the budget. We're almost a year into the budget, a year overtime with no budget. The federal courts are running the economy of the state of Illinois, and we need to take it back. All we ask is that the governor sit down and do the budget with us.
And the governor is not going to do the budget at this point unless he gets some of the turnaround agenda items passed.
Well, let's take a look at the record. The record is that we passed some workers' comp reforms. He wasn't interested in them. We tried to do property tax freezes as he wanted. He wasn't interested in that. We passed a bill regarding public-private partnerships that was originally on his turnaround agenda. He didn't like the way we did that. He needs to learn that this is a place of compromise. This is a place where you don't always get your own way, like when he ran all those businesses all those years. The members of the General Assembly are not his middle management. The members of the General Assembly are a co-equal branch of government, and we need a partnership with the governor. It's not a top-down approach to government.
You've had some members in on these working groups talking about further reforms to workers' compensation, further discussions of property tax freezes and the like. And yet, when Speaker Madigan was going into the leaders' meeting with the governor yesterday, he said, I don't think he's made his case. He hasn't been persuasive enough. Some of the Republicans say there was actually some progress being made there. Did you pull the plug too quickly?
I don't think so. But those conversations are ongoing. In fact, a couple of representatives in their floor comments yesterday said, as soon as we finish this debate, we're going to our working group. I think the working groups have done a great job in finding some issues, honing them down, talking about cost savings, talking about budget issues and other issues. However, until the governor actually says, I'm ready to move forward to do a budget, to make some changes in the state of Illinois, it's not going to happen. He's the speed bump. There is no other speed bump.
Well, the problem is that if you pass a budget, you take the pressures off of improving the jobs climate. If we passed a budget today, they would adjourn and go home, and the idea of improving our jobs climate will not pass. And then we're back to the square one, the same situation that we've been in for 12 years. If we thought that raising taxes would solve Illinois' problem, or that the reason people are leaving Illinois is because our taxes are too low, it makes no sense. So part of that budget is let's pass some of these core changes that everyone knows has to be done, but it's got to be agreed to changes, not ones that are just coming from the speaker.
That's almost an admission that this is a hostage taking. It's almost an admission that, well, the governor's purposely not doing the budget because he has this political agenda he wants to take care of, and until we do that for him, there will be no budget. It was just exactly what Democrats have been saying.
No, unfortunately not hostage. It's just that we can't keep doing the same thing that we've done for 12 years. Pass a budget, raise taxes, and think everything is going to be fine. It hasn't worked for 12 years.
As we sit here, though, it looks as though, at the moment, at any rate, unless there's some big break in this logjam in the next few hours or a couple of days, it looks like The House has passed a budget. The Senate may pass something similar. We don't know what the Senate's going to do right now. And you may be in the same position that you have been for the last 11 months come June 30th. No budget at all, and we keep limping along.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. Anyone can pass a budget. Anyone can pass spending. The problem is, where's the revenue going to come from? And when you're $7 billion or more out of whack on a budget, that's something that I think the Senate's probably not even going to take up. It's got to be something realistic. People out there know you have to pass a balanced budget. You have to pay for the spending you're doing. So the two things, the problem we're looking at is, one, our jobs climate is not improving, and two, you have to have revenue to be able to pay for the spending.
There's an argument that could be made that we haven't had a balanced budget here in this place, probably going back to the Edgar administration when he started rolling over the school aid payments into the next fiscal year. So, what really is a balanced budget when it comes to all of the legerdemain that you can engage in here?
I think different people have a different approach to what a balanced budget is, and of course we should have one. Democrats want a balanced budget. I don't think anybody on the House floor that voted for that bill yesterday feels that we're going to have a $39 billion budget in the end. And don't forget that because the governor will not engage us on the actual budget process, we're forced to act. May 31st is coming. We have a constitutional mandate to get a budget accomplished. We're going to pass a budget, and the governor has a line item veto. If he's willing to do the heavy work, which he was not willing to do a year ago, he can make that budget anything he wants to make it.
So if at the end of the day, this budget plan that emerged here is out there, and that's what he has to deal with down on the second floor, that puts him in the position of having to veto funding for K through 12, for higher education, for a whole raft of human services.
He can veto it outright, as he did last year, except for the K-12 budget, or he can use his red pen, which the Constitution allows him to do, and make cuts. Last year, he was unwilling to do the hard work. He was unwilling to do the heavy lifting. I'm wondering if he will be this year.
Senator, was that the case?
We can't cut $7 billion out of a budget. I mean, that's ludicrous to think that the governor's going to make cuts that are that deep. Once you take out the mandatory programs and you take out the court-ordered programs, you would have to devastate K-12 and devastate human service programs to cut $7 billion out of a budget. So it needs to be much more reasonable, and that's why the governor and the Republicans have said, let's compromise. Let's do what we need to do to start improving our jobs climate, and then let's come up with a reasonable spending plan, and let's have the adult decision of figuring out how do you pay for that, because anyone can spend money. It just takes a little bit more to figure out where is the revenue going to come from.
I want to get back to something a little earlier. You're talking about engagement from the governor's part. He's had his budget director in this group of the budgeteers talking about various things, and they came up with a figure of about $5.4 billion in revenue increases and another $2.4 billion in cuts. And at the same time, that was Speaker Madigan made a comment a few days ago to one of our colleagues, Amanda Vinnick. He said, I think when Democrats look at this, they're going to say there's probably not enough revenue in this thing. Is that what this exercise was about yesterday? I don't
really think so, and we haven't had a discussion about whether that's enough revenue because there has not been a formal proposal. So news leaked out of these working groups about the 5.4 and increase of revenue and the 2.7. Note that that's a little over $7 billion altogether, about 8, which is exactly almost the amount that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said that the spending plan we passed yesterday is out of whack. So there's a way to get all of this done. This has never been about the numbers. The numbers can be worked out. The question is the willingness of the governor to sit down and do this.
You made a comment during that big labor rally last week here at the Capitol when there were thousands of people here that there might not be a budget as long as Bruce Rauner's governor. Is that a fact? It
is a fact, but some people misinterpreted that. I didn't mean we can't work with him. I simply meant that he's not interested in doing a budget. He's only interested in his turnaround agenda. He's only interested in the political items on the agenda that we believe will hurt the middle class. But whether they do or they don't, he doesn't have the votes to pass those things. We tried in the Illinois House to to make compromises on workers' comp and other things. He's just not interested.
So we're still stalemated. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate it. Senator Syverson, Representative Lang. Up next on the program, we're going to talk with a couple of lawmakers who have about 50 years of combined legislative service here at the Capitol, and they're not going to be back after their current terms end. Well, we have a couple of guests on Illinois Lawmakers who are making a return to the program who have kind of a unique view of the legislative process here. There's Senate Education Committee Chairman William Delgado, a Democrat from Chicago. He first served in the House of Representatives from 1999 to 2006 before moving to the Senate later that year. Deputy House Republican Leader David Leitch of Peoria served in the Illinois Senate from 86 to 87 and came to the House in 1989, is that right?
Correct.
And the two of you have actually worked together on a number of things over the years, so it's kind of a homecoming to have you both here.
Yes, we have. It's a privilege to serve with them.
There were a number of issues you worked together on over the years, like you were just discussing before we rolled here that you worked together on mental health issues over the years.
Absolutely. As the former chairman of Human Services and actually one of the original authors of the Campaign for Better Healthcare, Universal Healthcare here, I passed it in the House. Working on the Mental Health Parity Act, understanding that our senators around the state and Representative Leitch has a very good grasp and understanding of it downstate and around the state. And so actually he helped shape me and my thinking somewhat as to how to approach it from a government standpoint if it was in Chicago or south of I-80.
I've had a very strong affinity for working on mental health. For the last 14 years, most Monday mornings I meet with our providers. Mm-hmm. I believe it's extremely important to start the conversation by providing access, timely access to families who have issues at a community-based level. The National Alliance on Mental Illness is the group that I would respect there because they're the families who actually are suffering, have family members suffering from mental illness. So if the system isn't working for those people, it's not working. But subsequently, through the years, we've done many things, including mental health court, got a residency in psychiatry in Peoria at the School of Medicine. Most importantly, I think we've created a crisis center which diverts people from jail or the emergency rooms.
The two of you are an excellent example of what I've seen here over my 25 years of coming to Springfield, where lawmakers from various chambers have expertise in certain areas, and that complements each other when you're both working toward a solution.
Yes, and I appreciate the comments because really we have opposite of issues, rather views on certain issues that's going to be germane to our districts. At the end of the day, we were able to pair up and line up because the representative points out we're talking about families. You've noticed we're talking about the voters, the families, the Illinoisans. And this was the history we've had and what I like because we're policymakers. And sounds like there was someone great man who said, you know, 50% of people could be here for the next campaign, another 50% here for the next generation. So when we deal with these very health needs or mental health, it helps us come together regardless of what party or positions you may have.
And yet at the end of the day, there are still some seemingly intractable issues here at the Capitol. Just yesterday, we're talking on Thursday morning, the House Democrats muscled through a budget over the objections of the Republicans on the House floor here that is some $7 billion out of whack, but they say the House Democrats says it represents their priorities. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of agreement here.
It went through rules, you know, an hour before it hit the floor. It was 500 pages. No one had seen it. And the thing that was most distressing at the end is we had asked for a verification and we're not granted a verification, which is rather fundamental, isn't it?
And I would part ways with Representative Leitch at this point, except with the last comment he just made. As to the process and procedure and rules, I totally agree. I mean, if there was a verification vote to be taken, then that should have been done. Now, muscling a bill through Well, it would be, either party would say, well, we're in the majority, are we muscling it through, or are we using the ability that we have to have that majority? And the fact of putting sunshine on the issues of saying, yes, these are the priorities. The governor has the options to do line by line veto on those things. Between now and at the end of the line of trying to get this budget under this dome, there's billions of dollars, someone's getting it, to realize that number, how real that $7 billion will be. We have been playing with numbers for the last 3 years around here, and cost, and what are those priorities? What should our priorities be in that budget, and free of any political agendas? I'm usually working with a Republican governor, a Democratic governor. It has nothing to do with how we're going to run our next election. And I think that has come under this dome and has really saddened me, because I am not here for my next campaign. I admonish people as a chairman, we should be focusing our efforts and our time on building policy that we can all agree on. Where we separate, we can always have time. The bill never dies around here, and we have all the way through veto.
Representative Leitch, though, your party has been standing very steadfastly with the governor on this turnaround
The state
agenda.
is totally dysfunctional, and has been, in my view, since Blagojevich, where we've seen just overwhelming destruction of the state from the time when Willie and I showed up here. And the issue right now are the concerns that we have to figure out a way to begin growing our way out of this mess, not just tax spending and borrowing our way out. And so that has put Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan at loggerheads, and that is what we're all suffering from right now, is that stalemate.
And I'd like to offer on that note, Jack, because as someone who has with elected officials, when we, as the Speaker of the House is the President of the Democratic Party too, and as someone who really came in on the edge of Democratic side of coming in almost as an independent, at the end of the day, when you have a governor at a state fair talking about the party wants to overthrow the Democratic Party, it changes the priority. And so this gentleman, who's the Speaker of the House, then he has to protect a whole Democratic Party. So it gets away from the issue of no. We were able to work with Governor George Ryan and others to just get policy done, and those were the elections are for, and we'll worry about who's going to be in office. In terms of reforms, we've always had to deal with prevailing wage. We've always had to they've always tried to cut back. The economy in the United States is flying. And at the end of the day, Illinois hub, some of this is really, it's not a lack of money in this state. It's a structural political problem. And my family's from Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico has a financial problem, and yet they have a budget. And I work there too, because I have my constituents, many are Puerto Rican in the 2nd Legislative District, and U.S. citizens, we find it appalling that a great state like Illinois, that we're working without a budget because there's a political infighting between the governor and the president of the Democratic Party.
Based on what's happened here in the last 24 hours or so, I don't see that there's any kind of early end to this thing. It looks to me like...
I don't either. No. I mean, Speaker Madigan won his power struggle against Blagojevich and Emil Jones, but at what cost? In my view, it destroyed the state. Similarly, right now, Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan are having a massive power struggle. Many of us wish that we could put some governance in there somewhere and be able to stop the suffering that the people are having and come together and get a budget and an accommodation. But right now, there's a very bitter standoff between the two, and unfortunately, it's gotten very personal.
Can the two, you're two of the 177 members here. Can the two of you, based on where you are in your caucuses and your senior positions, force any kind of any change to this, from the grassroots up?
Well, from my standpoint as Senate, I believe we do have that opportunity. And from the Senate side, people are saying that we've been more palatable as to trying to work with the administration on that from the Senate President Cullerton's position. And I understand that because, again, very pragmatic. And however, at the end of the day, it seems that we're dealing with the policy side of it. What keeps hitting the wall is that there seems to be another agenda behind that. And so if we say, look, this is a Pepsi, they say, no, it's a Coke. We say, it's a Coke, it's a 7-Up. At what stage do we get it? And I am very concerned that We don't have to hit the assets in children in education, children with autism, families who have needs in wheelchairs, mental health centers, hospitals. Let's put that aside and keep helping the communities and give them their due to the voters, and let's keep that table going all year long.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Representative Leitch, can we do it in the time remaining?
I don't think we're going to do it for some time unless something extraneous happens that would create a crisis here. But the point I think is important to make is that what we should be doing is working together to cobble together a budget that each side can agree on. Right now, this stalemate is simply hurting a lot of people.
Representative Leitch, Senator Delgado, thank you both for joining us. And again, thank you both for your many years of good service to the people of Illinois. We certainly appreciate that. And,
Thank you.
It's been a
It's
pleasure
always a
working
pleasure to
with
work
both
with
of you. That is it for this edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We'll be back next week as we see how things draw to a close on May 31st. So long from Springfield.